Welcome back. It's Miss Wagers again, and we are going to finish up Lesson 8 today by reading Chapter 22. So let's go ahead and jump right in with our learning intentions. We are learning to analyze the author's word choices so we can discuss the text in detail. So we know we are successful when we can define word choice, define figurative language, and then use the author's word choices to describe a story in detail. So these are the same learning intentions and success criteria as our previous lesson. For vocabulary, we just have the word noble, and that means having or showing fine personal qualities. So a noble person really means that they kind of do things well, they're nice, they're kind to others, or maybe are humble. So having good personal qualities. So for your vocabulary activity today, you are going to use each of our 3 vocabulary words from today's lesson and our previous lesson in a sentence. So you have the word agenda, the word pioneering, and then the word noble. So you'll use each of those in a sentence. We are going to get right into reading with reading chapter 22, New Business. At 9:20 on Thursday night, Greg sat next to his dad and mom near the back of the meeting room in the municipal building. He sat up extra straight once in a while, trying to see the small group of principals because Mr. Z had said they would be here. And in the second or third row, down near the front, he was pretty sure he'd spotted the back of Mrs. Davenport's head. Greg squirmed on the folding chair, twisting his neck from side to side. He couldn't get comfortable. He had on a blue sport coat, a pair of itchy gray pants, a white shirt, his best black shoes, and a red necktie borrowed from his brother Ross. Dressing up was Mara's idea. Greg had complained, but she had insisted. Why do you want to look like some kid who just came in from the playground? Mara sat 3 chairs away. She was wearing a dark blue pantsuit and a white shirt with a small ruffle at the neck, her new business outfit, bought especially for the occasion. Then came Mr. and Mrs. Shaw at the other end of the row. Mr. Z sat next to Greg. Greg decided that his math teacher was just as twitchy as he was. They had all been sitting, waiting, fidgeting for almost 2 hours. Greg had seen the school committee meetings on the local cable TV channel, but he had always flipped right past. And now he knew why. These people talked and talked and talked. Healthcare for teachers, new science books, snow plowing, special education grants, state funding for tests, roof repairs, on and on and on. Greg whispered to Mr. Z, "How much does the town pay the school committee?" Mr. Z held up his right hand with the tips of his fingers and thumb and forefinger pressed together. And at first, Greg didn't get it. Then he whispered, "0?" So let's stop and pause for just a second. Why did Greg dress up for the presentation? Let's see if you were listening. Why did they do that? Right, because Mara told him to. She said, "Do you want to look like some kid who came in off from the playground?" So she said that they had to dress up. So he dressed up only because Mara told him to. Mr. Z nodded. So there it was again. All the people in the world were carrying noble volunteers. So again, there's that word, noble. Except for Greg Kenton, who was selfish and greedy. The note cards Greg had held had been rolled, unrolled, bent, chewed on, and twisted until the black ink had turned gray and smudgy. But it didn't matter because Greg had planned out exactly what he was going to say anyway. And he got to talk first because he had won the coin toss. Heads, a victory over Mara. But at the moment, he was wishing he had called tails. As Greg began going over his opening statement for the 9th time, the chairperson of the school committee said, "For the next item under new business, we have a proposal about a comic book club at Ashworth School. Who's speaking on this?" Greg bounced to his feet and managed to say, I am. The chairperson pointed. "Please come up to the table and talk into the microphone." Mara thought Greg looked very nice tonight in his blazer and his gray slacks. His black eye was almost gone, and she was pretty sure he had even tried to brush his hair. As Greg went down the center aisle, he got a good look at Mrs. Davenport sitting in the second row with the other principals. She wasn't smiling. Greg handed a copy of Return of the Hunter and a copy of The Lost Unicorn to each of the 5 committee members. He also gave each of them a book club flyer. Greg sat at the table in front of the microphone. A woman from the local cable channel turned on the video camera, and a small red light began blinking at him. Greg tried to smile into the camera, but his mouth was so dry his lips got stuck on his front teeth. His pounding heart made it feel like he had a squirrel running around under his shirt. The microphone was so high that Greg pulled one leg up under him, cleared his throat, leaned forward, and rattled off his first sentence in a loud, squeaky voice. I'm Greg Kenton, and I go to Ashworth Intermediate School." Greg gulped and forced himself to talk slower and lower. I started making little comic books over the summer. He held up the crayon comic. This was the first one, and in September, I took some copies to school and I sold them to my friends, one for $0.25. And everybody liked them, but I didn't know I had to have permission from the school committee to sell things at school, until Mrs. Davenport told me. So that's what I'm here to ask for. Holding up a copy of The Lost Unicorn, Greg said, Mara Shaw, she lives across the street from me, and she made this comic. I helped her. And now we both want to make more. I call them chunky comics. And we think the kids will really like them because they're fun to read. Kids could even collect them. Greg held up the book club flyer and noticed that his hand was shaking. Every month at our school, some of the teachers give the kids an ad like this, mostly in language arts or reading class. There are all kinds of books in here, and on the back there's an order form, and the kids choose what they want and they bring money to school and they buy the books, and kids really like it. So we want to do the same thing, sell our comic books to kids at school. That was the cue for Mara to stand up. Greg turned stiffly and pointed at her. Mara Shaw will now explain the way our comic book club would work. Greg got up and headed toward a chair on the left side of the room as Mara walked to the front. If Mara were nervous, she didn't show it. From a file folder cradled in one arm, she took the slim stack of stapled pages and handed one packet to each committee member. She walked to the table, sat lightly on the front edge of the chair, spread some papers out in front of her, and said, "Good evening," into the microphone. She nodded and smiled at the camera and then to each of the committee members. Holding up her copy of the packet, she said, "Please look at the first page of the information I handed you. This is the sample order form for Chunky Comics Club. Right now, there are only 2 titles available, the ones Greg handed you. There would be a new order form every month, unless there were any new titles. Just like regular book clubs, teachers get to choose whether or not they want to be part of our club. And just like a book club, when kids order comics, teachers get to order copies for free to have in their classrooms." Mara looked up at the committee members. She said, "Please turn to page 2. Greg was impressed with Mara's performance so far. No goof-ups, no shakiness, no drooling, just about perfect. Except she looked like she was 23 years old. And was that makeup on her face, or was it just the way her cheeks looked when she got excited about something? Because he'd noticed that before. Papers rustled and Mara said, "Our comic book club also wants to do something different. If we make any money selling our comics at school, we want to donate part of the money to the new book fund of our school library, 10% of all the profits." Mara moved on to page 3. "We know there are other kids at our school who are good at writing and drawing, so we want to have some after-school workshops and maybe help some of the other kids to be creative too. And that might mean that there would be more comics and maybe other kinds of books or stories for Chunky Comics Club." Mara slowly turned the page, lifted the packet, and made a dramatic pause. Gently waving the sheet back and forth, she said, "This last page is important. Regular book clubs are careful about picking the right kind of books to sell to different aged kids. We're going to be careful too. Everybody knows that some of the comic books at stores are really violent. Chunky Comics won't be like that. Everything sold by our club is going to be approved in advance by teachers. Mr. Xanatopoulos said he would be one of those teachers, and Mrs. Lindahl said she would help too. And now our advisor, Mr. Xanatopoulos, would like to say a few words." Mr. Z made his way to the front of the room, and Mara moved over to sit by Greg. Mr. Z had no handouts. He sat down in front of the microphone and said, "I know it must seem like Greg and Mara are making a strange request. At first, I thought so too. As all of you know, I teach math, and I tend to think that way, mathematically. And the more I've looked at Greg and Mara, Greg and Mara are asking, everything adds up. It's completely logical. The book clubs have permission to sell books directly to kids at school. These clubs sell all kinds of books, including ones about cartoon and comic book characters. So Greg and Mara want permission to do the same. They have been creative and responsible, and they've found an interesting way to use the skills that they have developed at school in reading, writing, art, history, science, and of course, math. As teachers, we try to prepare kids for life after they leave school, and for the time that they will go out and earn money and become contributing members of the economy and the society. So I think it's great that these kids are doing this right now at their own level in a positive and practical way. And I don't see any conflict at all with the skills and the values that our schools are trying to teach." Mr. Z took a deep breath and then said, "I know some people don't think comic books are good for children. With your permission, I'd like to use a little math right here. I've been sitting in the back of the room, and I have counted 41 grown-ups at this meeting. So I'm asking for a show of hands, please. How many of us used to read comic books once in a while when we were in elementary or middle school?" Greg looked over the audience and quickly counted 29 hands. Among the small cluster of principals, only 2 did not raise their hands, and Mrs. Davenport was one of them. Mr. Z made a small note on a pad of paper. Then he said, "Hands down, please." That was 71% of the grown-ups in the room. Now, how many of us read cartoon books when we were children or young teens? Cartoons like Peanuts or Garfield or maybe Disney characters. All but 6 hands went up. Mr. Z made a note, a quick scribble, and then said, "That's 85% of us." Then Mr. Z said, "And how many of us regularly looked at comics or cartoons in newspapers or magazines when we were between the ages of 8 to 12? 100% of the hands in the room went up, even Mrs. Davenport's. Mr. Z turned and smiled at the committee. "There's my proof. Apparently, comic books and cartoons do not have the power to keep children from growing up to become responsible citizens like us, the kind of people who run schools and school districts and decide how to spend millions of tax dollars every year. And I believe that the kids at our school will not be harmed by this chunky comics club. If anything, I think they'll be inspired to engage in a lot of constructive ways. So I rest my case, and as Mara said, I'm happy to be one of the teachers who make sure that every item presented by this club is appropriate." Mr. Z nodded at the committee members and said, "Thank you," then stood up and walked back to his seat. The chairperson put a hand over her microphone and leaned left and then right to whisper to the other members of the committee. Then she said, "Thank you, Mr. Xenotopoulos, and thank you, Greg and Mara, for your interesting presentation. The committee would like to take some time to," we're going to stop for a second. How does Mr. Z use math to support his argument during the presentation? What did he do? What did he do with math? Again, were you paying attention? Right, so he has people raise their hand to say if they have looked at comic books. And so he's using math and percentages to show, oh, look, a lot of people like comics and they've all turned out okay. And it didn't harm them to where they didn't become good citizens. So remember the committee member. The committee would like to take some time to consider the request before voting. It's getting late, so if there's no other discussion, we can move on to the last item under new business, the contract with the food service company for high school. Greg watched the chairperson as she looked out across the room, and Greg saw her eyes stop, saw her face change, saw that she was about to call on someone, because someone wanted more discussion about the Chunky Comics Club. Without even looking, Greg knew who it was, and he was right. It was Mrs. Davenport. So again, we are going to be focusing on word choice again today, friends. So again, we're going to start off with the same quote from Andrew Clements as from our previous lesson. So remember that everything that happens in a book happens on purpose. The words did not just land on the page that way by chance. As you read a book, you're looking at thousands and thousands of decisions someone made. And if you begin to think like a writer, you may be able to discover why a particular sentence was written in that particular way. So remember, Andrew Clements, he didn't just put these words on the pages for no reason. He was very particular in his choices and how he wrote this book. So we want to really think about, why did he say that? So again, it can include the use of figurative language like similes and metaphors. And remember, figurative language is when authors don't say exactly what they mean. So for example, in a simile, that you compare 2 unlike things using the words like or as. So her reflexes were as quick as a cat. Were quick as a cat. So again, we're comparing the reflexes to a cat and the speed. Or a metaphor uses the word is to say that one thing is something else. So I gave the sentence like Mrs. Sanborn is a bear when she's angry. She's not actually a bear, but it's showing like what kind of anger she might have. So we're going to think about some similes and metaphors today. So in this first little snippet that you see, you want to look like some kid who just came in from the playground. So we can see the simile look like. So remember, a simile uses the word like or the word as. So we have the word like, some kid who just came in from the playground. So that's what Mara, remember, had said to Greg. She said, you want to look like some kid who had just come in from the playground. So she's comparing how Greg would look to a kid that just comes in off the playground. And we know a kid coming in off the playground is probably going to be hot and sweaty and a little disheveled. And she wanted to make sure that they looked nice for the school committee presentation. And then here, in this next paragraph, it said, as Greg's getting ready to present, Greg tried to smile into the camera, but his mouth was so dry his lips got stuck to his front teeth. His pounding heart made it feel like he had a squirrel running around under his shirt. Now again, does he actually have a squirrel under his shirt? Of course not. But again, we have a simile here using the word like, because he feels like he has a squirrel running around in his shirt because his heart is beating so fast. Thump, 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 right? And then another one, let's see. It said when Mara was presenting, Greg was impressed with her, but then he said, except she looked like she was 23 years old. Is Mara actually 23? Of course not. No. But because she had this makeup on and everything, she's looking so professional. Greg's going, man, she looks like an adult. She looks like she's 23 years old. So again, that's how Andrew Clements is really helping us to see Mara is looking really professional and put together and really grown up and mature with this. And Greg, with this squirrel running under his shirt, Greg is super nervous. So Andrew Clements is using some specific word choices to help us understand what's happening in the story even more. You have to just be really in tune to what he's saying. Because if you're not paying attention, you just blow right past him. You're like, oh yeah, he's just writing. But Andrew Clements was very specific in these words he chose. So saying it was like a squirrel running under his shirt, he could have just said his heart was pounding and been done with it. But you can get more of a picture, more of an idea when you think about, oh my gosh, if a squirrel was running around under his shirt, man, his heart must be beating really fast. Or he could have just said that Mara was wearing makeup and had a pantsuit on. But instead, he said that she looked like she was 23 years old. Showing us that she's looking really grown up and mature. So back to our learning intentions for today. We're learning to analyze the author's word choices so we can discuss a text in detail. So we know we're successful when we can define word choice. So again, we've done that. The author does not just put the words on there willy-nilly. They are making decisions for every word that they put on the page. Check. And then define figurative language. So that's, again, when authors don't say exactly what they mean, and usually that could mean that they use similes or metaphors. Check. And then use the author's word choices to describe a story in detail. So we're thinking about how Greg and Mara were feeling and looking at the school committee meeting. All right, check, guys. So your reading response, you first need to underline the simile in the text. And we already talked about this during our lesson, so make sure that you were paying attention because I already gave you the answer to this first one. So you need to underline the simile. And then based on the simile, how does Greg feel when he was presenting to the school committee, and how do you know? Be sure to answer in a complete sentence, starting with a capital letter and ending with a period. All right, that is all for today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Be kind to one another, do all of your work, and I will see you guys later. Bye.